Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a deep dive into some sources you shared with us, all about financial education, a topic that's incredibly important, but yeah, often feels overlooked.
Absolutely. We've got excerpts here from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and also Rich Dad's Cash Flow Quadrant, books by Robert Kiyosaki. And his perspective is shaped by something, well, pretty unique. Having two really influential father figures with completely different ideas about money and wealth.
Right. So our mission in this deep dive is to, really unpack these sources. We want to pull out the core lessons, understand this contrasting view on money, and see what these books argue the wealthy teach their kids that maybe others miss.
Yeah, and get ready because some of these ideas, they really challenge conventional wisdom. They offer a potentially surprising perspective on why financial outcomes can vary so wildly, even for people who work, incredibly hard.
Okay, let's unpack this central idea presented right at the start. The author had his poor dad, who was highly educated, successful professionally, I think superintendent of schools, but financially, he struggled his whole life.
That's right. And then there was his rich dad, the father of his best friend, an entrepreneur, didn't even finish high school, but became one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii. So both successful in their careers, earning good money, yet totally different financial
And the
realities.
core difference, according to these sources, wasn't just the income level itself. It was fundamentally about their philosophy, their teaching regarding money.
Exactly. One believed you work for money. Standard path, right? Get a good job. The other taught the author how to have money work for him.
That's a pretty significant shift in perspective right there. Huge.
And what's fascinating here is how the sources connect this back to, well, our education system. They basically argue that schools are excellent at teaching you scholastic skills, professional skills.
Yeah, how to be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher.
Right. How to get a job, how to work for money. But they rarely, if ever, teach you financial skills, how to manage that money once you get it, how to keep it, and, crucially, how to make it work for you.
And that's what the author calls financial aptitude or financial IQ.
Precisely.
So this is where it starts to explain that paradox of the poor dad.
Mm,
The sources argue this lack of formal financial education is why brilliant, highly educated people, engineers, scientists, doctors, even bankers, they can still face financial difficulties.
hmm They're experts in their field, sure, but their financial IQ might be, well, low. The source even suggests this plays a role in bigger things like national debt.
Hmm.
Educated politicians making financial decisions without maybe adequate training in money itself.
Wow. Okay, let's look at some specific advice from the two dads that really highlights this split. When faced with something they wanted but couldn't easily afford, what did poor dad say?
His typical response was, I can't afford it. Full stop.
And rich dad?
He insisted on asking, how can I afford it?
That's a really powerful distinction, isn't it?
Right.
The first statement just closes the door, shuts down the brain.
Yeah, it's an answer. The second is a question. It forces creativity, problem solving. Rich Dad apparently saw saying, I can't afford it, as a sign of, well, mental laziness, which is pretty direct.
Yeah, that's a challenging thought. What about risk?
Totally different views again. Poor Dad's advice. Play it safe. Avoid risks. Very conventional.
Mhm.
Rich Dad's approach was learn to manage risk. He believed avoiding risk wasn't the path. Understanding it, mitigating it. That was key.
Okay, and maybe the most provocative one, especially for a lot of people listening, their view on the family home. Poor dad believed.
Poor Dad believed our home is our largest investment and our greatest asset. Sounds familiar, right?
Absolutely, it's almost gospel for many, but
hmm
rich dad.
Complete opposite. My house is a liability, and if your house is your largest investment, you're in trouble.
Wow, that really pushes back against a widely held belief,
Yeah.
a huge one.
It absolutely does. And another little contrast was how they handled bills. One paid bills right away the moment they came in.
And the other? Rich dad.
He intentionally paid bills last, after he'd allocated money to his asset column first.
Okay, so that links to this principle the sources keep mentioning, paying yourself first. We'll probably circle back to that.
Definitely. And building on that, the sources make a really strong case that the main roadblocks to financial well-being aren't always external things like the economy or the government.
But internal ones.
Yeah, self-inflicted fear and, frankly, financial ignorance.
Okay, so if that's the mindset difference, what's the fundamental building block according to these sources?
It really boils down to a very simple, very usable definition of an asset versus a liability. Rich Dad's rule was super straightforward.
Which was?
An asset is anything that puts money in your pocket. A liability is anything that takes money out of your pocket.
That seems incredibly simple.
Yeah.
Almost too simple. Why isn't everyone just doing that if it's that straightforward?
Well, according to the sources, that is the core problem. Most people don't actually know the difference in practice, or they don't apply it. They spend their lives buying things they think are assets,
Like the house.
often like the house or the fancy car, but based on that simple cash flow definition, they're actually liabilities. They look at maybe a balance sheet, but they miss the story the numbers tell, the cash flow story.
Ah, the numbers tell the cash flow pattern. I remember the sources use diagrams for this, which are helpful.
Yeah, they make it clear. The pattern for the poor and middle class typically shows income coming in, like from a job,
Uh-huh.
and then it flows almost immediately out to expenses, rent, food, bills, and to liabilities, car payments, credit cards, maybe that mortgage payment. Very little, if anything, actually makes it into an asset column.
Right. It's just in and out.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with the pattern shown for the rich. Income flows in, yes, but a significant chunk goes into buying or building assets first.
Things that put money in your pocket.
Precisely. These assets then generate more income, which flows back in. That income covers expenses, and the surplus, the extra. It often gets reinvested into buying more assets.
So it creates this reinforcing cycle. The assets buy more assets,
Mm.
making the rich, well, richer, because their money is working for them.
That's the idea. Their money is actively working to generate more money, not just being spent.
And this highlights that classic middle-class trap. The sources call it the rat race.
Yeah, the rat race. As people earn more money from their jobs, which seems good, right? A promotion or raise.
Yeah, sounds great.
But then they often face higher taxes, and crucially, their expenses tend to creep up too. They buy a bigger house.
Which Rich Dad calls a liability.
Right. Nicer cars, more stuff, lifestyle upgrades, often funded with debt.
So even with a higher income, they're still dependent on that next paycheck, still stuck in the race.
Exactly. And the sources describe this as actually living a high-risk financial life, precisely because of that weak financial education, that low financial IQ.
Which brings us back to the power of developing that financial IQ. The sources break this down into, what, 4 core technical skills? Skills often missed in regular school?
Yeah, 4 main ones. First is accounting, or you could call it financial literacy. It's the ability to read the numbers, to understand financial statements. It's like learning the language of money.
So you can look at a business or an investment and actually understand its health, its strengths, its weaknesses.
Right. Can you read the story the numbers are telling? Second is investing. This is the science, really, of money making money. Understanding how passive income and portfolio income actually work.
Okay.
Third is understanding markets.
Yeah.
The science of supply and demand. Being able to spot opportunities, maybe see trends or needs that others don't, because you understand how markets behave.
Makes sense. And the fourth one sounded really important in the sources.
Yeah. Number 4 is the law. Specifically, understanding tax laws and corporate structures. This is a big one. The sources really emphasize that corporations offer significant legal tax advantages that employees just don't get. Well, think about it. A corporation can earn money, pay its expenses, and then pay taxes on whatever profit is left.
Okay.
An employee earns money, gets taxed on it immediately, and then has to try and pay all their expenses and maybe save something with what's left over after tax.
I see. So the order matters.
Hmm.
The rich, using legal corporate structures, can strategically minimize taxes and protect their assets in ways employees can't.
That's the argument presented. They even touch on the history of income tax, suggesting, maybe controversially, that taxes originally aimed at the rich ended up hitting the middle class hardest. Why? Because the wealthy had the resources and knowledge to find legal ways, like corporations, to shield their income.
Interesting historical perspective there. So the takeaway isn't just about earning more from your job.
No. The focus shifts. Instead of just earned income from a job, the sources argue the rich focus on acquiring passive income, typically from things like real estate and portfolio income, from paper assets like stocks, bonds, that kind of thing.
And the key to financial freedom, as they define it, is converting your earned income from your job into these other types of income, the types that don't require you to trade your time directly for money.
Exactly, which connects directly to that advice about minding your own business.
Right, which doesn't necessarily mean quitting your job tomorrow.
No, not at all. It means using the income from your job, your profession, to actively build your asset column. Investing in things that generate income, that put money in your pocket, according to that definition.
So keep your day job, Be great at it, but make sure you're prioritizing building those income-generating assets on the side, not just letting your salary flow out to cover expenses and liabilities.
That's the core message. Your job pays the bills, maybe. Your business is building your assets.
Okay, now here's a concept from the sources that sounds, well, almost magical. The rich invent money. What does that actually mean? It's not literal printing, obviously.
Haha. No, not counterfeiting. It means creating wealth through financial intelligence, spotting opportunities and structuring deals in ways that others just don't see or don't know how to do.
Can you give an example of how that might work based on the sources?
Sure, real estate is often used as a prime example. It's not just about buying a house to live in. It's about finding, say, an undervalued property, maybe using creative financing, putting little or none of your own cash down initially.
Okay.
Then maybe you improve the property, force appreciation, or maybe market conditions improve its value. Then here's a key part. You might use legal tools like a 1031 tax-deferred exchange in the US. You sell that property, but instead of paying capital gains tax right away,
Ah,
you roll those gains directly into buying a bigger, better, maybe more income-producing property. You've deferred the tax, increased your asset base, and ideally increased your cash flow. This whole process, often done within a corporate structure for protection and tax reasons. It essentially created assets and wealth that didn't exist before you applied that financial know-how.
so you're using intelligence and legal structures to generate wealth, potentially without much of your own initial capital tied up long term.
That's the kind of thing the sources mean by inventing money. And the crucial point they make is that these opportunities aren't just lying there for anyone to see with their eyes. They're seen with your mind.
Meaning through your financial education, your financial IQ.
Exactly. The lack of that specific training, that way of thinking, is what prevents most people from even recognizing these opportunities, let alone acting on them.
Okay, but developing this financial intelligence and actually doing this stuff,
Yeah.
it can't be easy. The sources must talk about obstacles, right?
Oh, absolutely. They identify several big internal obstacles that hold people back.
Yeah.
Very relatable ones, actually.
Like what? Fear must be a big one.
Fear is huge, specifically the fear of losing money. It stops so many people dead in their tracks. They get analysis paralysis.
Just researching forever, never actually doing anything.
Right. They're so scared of making a mistake, losing their hard-earned savings, that they do nothing, which, ironically, is often a losing strategy in itself because of inflation or missed opportunity. The sources really stress that overcoming this fear, accepting that failure is part of learning, that's essential. Think about learning to ride a bike. You fall off, you get back on. Same principle.
Okay, fear. What else?
Cynicism. You know, the chicken littles, as the book calls them. The people who, the moment you mention an investment or an idea, immediately tell you all the reasons why it won't work, why the sky is falling.
Ah, the professional doubters.
Exactly. And that kind of pervasive doubt, the sources argue, is really expensive. It keeps you paralyzed by negativity, potentially missing out on great opportunities because you're listening to the noise instead of doing your own analysis.
Makes sense. Fear, cynicism, what's next?
Laziness. But not necessarily couch potato laziness. It's often masked by just being busy.
Easy working hard at your job.
Yeah. Busy working for money, paying bills, running on that hamster wheel, but not busy actually taking steps to build wealth, to mind your own business, to learn about investing. The sources suggest overcoming this requires real desire. They frame it kind of bluntly as needing a little greed.
Greed. How so?
Not negative greed, but asking yourself, what's in it for me? What positive outcome do I really want? Like, vividly imagining, what would my life actually look like if I never had to work for money again? That clear, desirable picture is the antidote to laziness. It provides the motivation to learn and act.
Okay, that reframing makes sense. Desire, not just sloth. And the last one.
Arrogance. Thinking you already know everything. This prevents people from learning. The sources say true intelligence involves being open to new ideas, listening more than you talk, especially when it comes to money.
And they had a strong warning about who you take advice from, right?
Very strong. Don't take financial advice, especially life-changing financial advice, from people who haven't actually achieved the financial results you aspire to yourself. Find mentors, advisors, professionals who are actually playing the game you want to play and playing it successfully.
That's practical.
Yeah.
So beyond overcoming these mental blocks, the sources also talk about skills needed outside your main profession.
Yeah, this is a fascinating point. They suggest many people might be just one skill away from great wealth. You could be brilliant technically, but if you can't sell or market or negotiate or understand basic business systems, you're limited.
So it's about broadening your skill set.
Exactly. The advice is really profound. Seek work opportunities not just for the paycheck you'll earn, but for the critical skills you'll learn. Learning how to sell, how to communicate effectively, how to lead people. These skills can leverage all your technical knowledge massively.
That's a different way to look at career choices. Okay, let's get into some practical principles shared in the sources. Pay yourself first came up earlier. How does that work?
It's about discipline. When income arrives, say your paycheck, you immediately allocate a portion to your asset column, buying stocks, contributing to a real estate fund, whatever your strategy is before you pay your bill.
Before rent, before utilities, before credit cards? That sounds stressful. What if you're short?
That's the point. If you find yourself short on bill money after you've paid yourself invested, the pressure is on. But instead of dipping back into your savings or investments, which defeats the purpose, you let that pressure motivate you. It forces you to think, okay, how can I generate more income? Find a side hustle, negotiate a raise, find a better deal somewhere. Don't raid your future to pay for your present.
That takes serious discipline. Wow. What else?
Another principle is about paying your professionals, brokers, accountants, attorneys. Pay them well, but the big caveat is only if they are competent and actively helping you make money. Don't just pay fees blindly.
And look for professionals who are investors themselves.
Ideally, yes. Find people whose financial interests are aligned with yours, who understand the B&I quadrants from experience, not just theory.
Got it. There was also a slightly unusual phrase, something about being an Indian giver. What was that about in the context of investing?
Yeah, that's an old, potentially problematic phrase, but the concept illustrated was about getting your initial investment back quickly. Focus on the return of your investment capital first. Once you've recouped what you put in, the asset itself, whether it's a rental property generating cash flow or a stock that's appreciated, essentially becomes free. Everything it produces from that point forward is pure profit on your initial risk, which is now zero.
Ah, okay. So the goal is to get your seed money back out, then let the asset work for you indefinitely, like the example of Ray Kroc and the McDonald's land.
Exactly. He made his real fortune not just from burgers, but from owning the real estate under the franchises. That became the core asset, essentially acquired for free over time through the franchise fees.
Okay. And underlying all these principles and skills
Yeah.
is the need to just do something.
Absolutely. Take action. Financial intelligence isn't just book smarts. It means actively looking for opportunities, driving around neighborhoods looking for sale by owner signs or rundown properties, talking to people, making offers, even low ones. The worst they can say is no.
And in financial markets.
Same idea. Shop for bargains. Buy when others are fearful in selling, when prices are down, assuming you've done your homework on the underlying value. Don't just follow the herd. Think big, learn continuously, and crucially, learn fast from your experiences, good and bad.
This whole philosophy seems to be summarized in that cash flow quadrant thing. Can you break that down quickly?
Sure. It's a simple framework. 4 letters. ESBIE stands for employee. You have a job, you work for someone else. S is for self-employed or small business owner. You own your job. Maybe you're a doctor in private practice or a consultant. You work for yourself.
Okay, E and S. That's where most people are.
Right. In both E and S, you're generally working for money. Your income stops if you stop working. Then there's B for big business owner. Here, you own a system and people work for you within that system. Think franchises, large corporations. The business runs and makes money even if you're not physically there every day.
And I.
I is for investor. Here, your money works for you. You invest in other people's businesses. B, or in assets like real estate, stocks, bonds. Your money generates more money.
And the argument is that traditional education trains us mostly for E and S.
Almost exclusively, yeah. The path to financial freedom, as described in these sources, is about understanding these quadrants and figuring out how to move towards the B&I side, where you own systems or investments that generate income without your constant direct labor.
And that cash flow game they mentioned that's supposed to help with this transition.
Yeah, it's presented as a tool, a board game, actually, designed to simulate real-life financial decisions in a safe space. You practice buying assets, managing cash flow, understanding balance sheets, dealing with market changes, moving between the quadrants, all with play money.
So you can learn the mechanics and, maybe more importantly, observe your own emotional reactions to winning, losing, taking risks without using real money.
Exactly. It aims to educate the whole person, mental, emotional, even physical reactions related to money about the B&I quadrants. The argument is it's a much faster and less painful way to learn these crucial lessons than trial and potentially costly error in the real world.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive into these sources, it
Yeah.
really does challenge a lot of, fundamental beliefs and habits many of us probably grew up with about money and work.
It definitely does. It makes a very compelling case that financial education isn't just some nice to have skill. It's presented as an absolute necessity for navigating the modern world and achieving any kind of real financial security or freedom.
And that distinction between assets and liabilities, it sounds so simple. But the way they define it by cash flow, does it put money in your pocket or take it out?
Mm.
Applying that consistently seems like where the real work, the real shift in thinking happens.
Absolutely. Truly internalizing that cash flow dynamic is what allows you, according to the sources, to start seeing the financial world and your own choices very differently.
So considering that stark contrast they draw between working for money, like in the E and S quadrants, and setting things up to have money work for you in the B and I quadrants, and realizing the very different skills and mindsets needed for each,
Hmm.
it definitely raises a pretty significant question for you, the listener, to think about.
Yeah, looking at your own financial situation right now, based on these definitions we've talked about,
Hmm.
what does your personal cash flow pattern actually look like? Where is your income primarily going? Is it flowing straight out again to cover expenses and pay for liabilities? Or is a good portion being intentionally directed towards building or buying assets, things that will eventually put more money back into your pocket?
Is your current financial formula taking you where you ultimately want to go? That's certainly something worth reflecting on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's giving you some valuable insights, maybe a new perspective on your own financial journey.